It began with a single brick, not a grand monument or a sprawling cathedral, but a simple, fired clay unit pulled from the basement of a condemned textile mill in lower Manhattan. I held it in my hands, feeling the grit of 19th century soot against my palms, and I realized something was wrong. We are told that industrialization was a triumph of efficiency, a streamlining of human effort into a standardized machine. Yet, when I applied a modern caliper to this artifact, the dimensions refused to align with our established history. It was too large for a standard hand grip, yet too precise to be accidental. It suggested a different scale of existence. Ask yourself why we assume the inch, the foot, and the yard are the natural extensions of our own anatomy. What if the anatomy they were designed for no longer exists? We see the remnants of this discrepancy everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It is in the vaulted ceilings of post offices that dwarf their occupants. It is in the massive iron doors of city halls that require two hands to turn a single knob. We call it aesthetic grandeur. We call it neoclassical ambition. We are lying to ourselves. This is not the architecture of aspiration. This is the architecture of inheritance. We moved into these structures like hermit crabs occupying shells far too large for our soft, diminished bodies. We scaled our furniture to fit. We lowered the light fixtures. And we built false floors to hide the soaring heights we could no longer reach. The anomaly is not the building. The anomaly is us. We are the smaller inhabitants of a world built for giants, navigating a landscape of institutional erasure that has scrubbed the original measurements from our textbooks. Look at the load distribution of a star fort. Look at the resonant frequencies of a grand central terminal. These are not merely aesthetic choices. They are functional requirements for a biology we have been trained to forget. Not a fluke, not a stylistic flair. Something else entirely, something older, something suppressed. Consider the narrative of the Great Fire. London, Chicago, San Francisco, Moscow. History is a litany of convenient incinerations. We are told that these cities, built primarily of wood, succumbed to the inevitable march of progress and flame. But look closer at the ruins. Examine the photographs of the aftermath, the ones the archives keep in the back rooms away from the casual researcher. You will see stone that has been vitrified. You will see iron that has melted into liquid pools. Wood fires do not achieve the temperatures required to liquefy granite. Ask yourself what kind of energy was actually unleashed in those streets. Ask yourself why the rebuilding process always resulted in the same thing, the systematic lowering of street levels. If you walk through any major metropolitan centre today, you are walking on a crust of debris. Beneath your feet are the original entrances, the mud-soiled windows of a maze. Civilization that understood the Earth's energetic ley lines with a precision we cannot replicate. This is the first layer of institutional gatekeeping. By burying the ground floor, they buried the evidence of the original scale. They relabeled the grand foyers as basements and the second-story windows as main entrances. It is a global pattern of vertical displacement. In Paris, in Prague, in the American Midwest, the story is identical. A sudden catastrophe followed by a rapid, uniform reconstruction that effectively lobotomizes the urban memory. We are living in the attic of a mansion, told that the rooms below us never existed, but the measurements do not lie. When you measure the riser height of a stone staircase in a pre-1850s government building, you find a cadence that is fundamentally uncomfortable for a modern human gait. It is too steep for a child, too shallow for a stride. It was designed for a leg with a different skeletal ratio. It was designed for a stride that covered more ground with less effort, not our stride, theirs. The erasure is not merely physical, it is linguistic. We use terms like imperial units to imply a lineage of kings and queens, a steady hand guiding the development of measurement. In reality, the imposition of the metric system was a tactical strike against the organic mathematics of the human form. The meter is an abstraction, a fraction of a meridian that no one can actually see or feel. It is a measurement of the void. Contrast this with the older systems, the cubit, the span, the digit. These were resonant. They were based on the proportions of the golden ratio, a fundamental constant of the biological universe. When we built according to those measurements, our structures resonated with the earth itself. This is why you feel a strange, heavy peace inside an old-growth cathedral, and a jarring, hollow anxiety inside a modern glass skyscraper. One is tuned to the frequency of life. The other is tuned to the frequency of the machine. The gatekeepers of our history claim that these ancient measurements were imprecise or regional. This is a calculated falsehood when you compare the royal cubit of Egypt with the sacred foot of the Druids and the Tala of the Vedic architects. You find a mathematical convergence that is statistically impossible for isolated cultures. They were using the same blueprint. They were measuring the same bodies. What if the Tartarian Empire wasn't a nation state, but a global era of standardized biological resonance, a time when the human form was the primary antenna for the energy of the cosmos? We have been severed from this antenna. We have been given plastic rulers and told to measure the world in dead increments. Ask yourself, who benefits from a population that can no longer sense the proportions of its own cage? I spent 3 months in the sewers of a city that officially began its history in 1840. According to the records, the brickwork down there was laid by hand by illiterate immigrants in less than 6 months. It is a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering. The load distribution is perfect. The mortar is harder than the brick itself, a geopolymer that defies modern chemical analysis. And then there are the markings. Etched into the keystones of the tunnels are symbols that do not belong to the 19th century. They are sigils of weight and measure, codes that denote a gravitational constant different from our own. If you calculate the volume of water these tunnels were designed to carry, it far exceeds the needs of the population at the time. It exceeds the needs of our population now. Why build for a flood that never comes, unless the flood had already happened, unless the tunnels weren't built for waste, but for the transmission of something else? In the urban exploration community, we talk about the ghost levels. These are the floors beneath the sub-basements where the architecture changes. The brick gives way to megalithic stone. The ceilings rise to 20 feet. The air feels different, electrically charged. This is where the erasure stops being a theory and becomes a physical weight. You stand in a room built for someone 12 feet tall, and you realize that every history book you've ever read is a nursery rhyme. We are told the giants were myths, but myths do not leave behind perfectly engineered drainage systems and copper-domed power stations. Institutional gatekeeping relies on the ridicule of the scale. They make the truth seem oversized, so that we feel small for even noticing it. The transition from the old world to the new was not a slow evolution. It was a violent reset. Between 1870 and 1910, the world was unified under a singular architectural aesthetic known as the Beaux-Arts, or international style. This was the final coat of paint on the hidden world. During this period, thousands of star forts across the globe were decommissioned, renamed, or converted into prisons and parks. Ask yourself, why does every continent have these identical, complex, geometric bastions? They are told to be defensive structures, yet many are located in valleys or surrounded by heights that make them tactically useless in a siege. They are not forts, they are circuitry. The measurements used in their construction are tied to the electromagnetic spectrum. The star shape is a resonator. By altering the standard human measurement, the new authorities ensured that we would never understand how to activate these sites. We are like children playing with a dead television, unaware that it was once a window to the world. They replaced the sacred geometry of the human body with the utilitarian geometry of the state. The result is a profound spiritual dislocation. We live in spaces that drain our energy because they are literally built to the wrong scale. The Tartarian measurement wasn't just about length, it was about frequency. A doorway wasn't just a hole in a wall, it was a tuning fork. When you walk through a door built to the old proportions, your heart rate synchronizes with the building. When you walk through a modern door, your field is fractured. This is how they keep us compliant. This is how they keep us tired. Look at the old world's orphan trains. Thousands upon thousands of children moved across the United States and Europe in the late 1800s, redirected to repopulation centres. Where did they come from? Why were their parents absent from the record? History says it was poverty and disease. But what if these were the survivors of the reset? What if they were the new humans, bred or modified to fit a world that had been downscaled? They were placed in the oversized ruins of their predecessors and told to call it home. They were given the new measurements, the metric system, the standardized clock, the Gregorian calendar, to ensure they could never reconstruct the past. This is the ultimate erasure, the replacement of a population's memory by replacing its physical context. The children played in the giant parks, lived in the giant houses, and were taught that the world was always this way. They were taught that the old ones were just a story, but the infrastructure remained, the massive bridges that a handful of men supposedly built with pulleys and ropes, the railroads that spanned continents with impossible speed. All of it was already there. It was unearthed, not built. It was refurbished, not invented. The great exhibitions and world's fairs of the 1890s were not celebrations of progress. They were the grand opening of the new world, a way to showcase the looted technology of the old empire before it was demolished or hidden behind plaster and lath. What if the Tartarian measurements were based on the Earth's pulse? The Schumann resonance is 7.83 Hertz. Modern research into ancient architecture reveals that the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, the Gothic cathedrals, and the Capitol buildings of the world all share multiples of this frequency. They are physical manifestations of a vibration. Our modern measurements are intentionally discordant. They are off-key. This creates a state of permanent low-level stress in the human nervous system. We are literally out of measure with our environment. The skeptics will say that this is mere coincidence, that humans naturally build in certain patterns, but coincidence does not explain the global uniformity. It does not explain why a courthouse in Iowa has the same acoustic signature as a temple in Uzbekistan. It does not explain the red thread of institutional erasure that has cut these connections from our awareness. We are told we are the peak of civilization, yet we cannot reproduce the Roman concrete of the old world. We cannot replicate the precision of the Incan walls. We are told we are smarter, yet we live in smart cities that make us sicker, weaker, and more distracted. Ask yourself, who redefined intelligence to mean the ability to operate a machine rather than the ability to understand the earth? The evidence of the Great Reset is etched into the very stones of our cities. If you look at the foundations of any neoclassical building, you will often see a distinct line where the masonry changes. Below the line, massive, perfectly fitted blocks of unknown origin. Above the line, smaller, shoddy bricks and mortar, the work of the new builders. This is the signature of the inheritance. We are a repair civilization. We find the ruins, we patch them up, and we put our names on them. We are like squatters in a palace, claiming we built the walls because we painted the shutters. The institutional gatekeepers, the university departments, the historical societies, the museum boards, are the ones who maintain the paint. They ensure that no one looks too closely at the foundation. They dismiss the Tartaria theory as a digital delusion, a fever dream of the internet age. But they cannot explain the measurements. They cannot explain why a primitive people would build doors 30 feet high. They cannot explain why every Renaissance map shows cities where there should be wilderness. They cannot explain the silent, massive presence of the old world that still vibrates beneath the noise of our modern life. In my investigation, I found a diary from a surveyor in 1882. He was tasking with mapping the wilderness of the American West. He wrote about finding cities already there. Not indigenous villages, cities, with paved streets, stone buildings, and iron towers that hummed with the sound of bees. He wrote that his orders were to remove the towers and mark the sites as natural rock formations. This is the mechanics of erasure. It is not just the destruction of buildings, it is the destruction of the map. By the time the settlers arrived, the cities had been scrubbed from the paper. The iron towers were gone. All that remained were the foundations, which were later used to build the pioneer towns. The surveyor's diary ends with a chilling thought. We are not the first to walk these streets, and we will not be the last to forget them. This is the somber reality of our existence. We are a forgetful species, living in a landscape of amnesia. We use the tools of the old world to build our own cages, never realizing that the tools themselves are a message. They are a reminder of a scale we have lost. We are left with an unresolved loop. If we were once larger, not just in stature, but in consciousness and connection to the world, what caused our diminishment? Was it a natural cycle, a great year of the cosmos, that necessitated a hibernation of the human spirit? Or was it a deliberate harvesting of our potential by forces that remain in the shadows? We look at the stars and wonder if we are alone, yet we are alone in our own cities, surrounded by the ghosts of a version of ourselves we can no longer recognize. The measurements are there, waiting to be rediscovered. The bricks are in our hands. The doorways are above our heads. The question is not whether the old world existed. The question is whether we are brave enough to measure the gap between who they were and what we have become. What if the forbidden knowledge is not a secret hidden in a vault, but the simple, terrifying realization that the world is not sized for us? Ask yourself, what happens when the inhabitants of the attic finally decide to go downstairs? The silence of the institutions is the only answer we are given. A silence that is as vast and hollow as the cathedrals we pretend to have built. The loop remains open. The mystery remains buried. We are the architects of our own forgetting, measuring our lives in inches, while the miles stretch out into a past we are forbidden to see. The silence of the subterranean levels is not an absence of sound, but a presence of weight. It is the hum of a machine that has been switched off but remains hot to the touch. When I descended into the flooded transit tunnels beneath the Midwestern corridors, I found the acoustic dampeners, massive circular chambers lined with a substance that looks like obsidian but feels like bone. These chambers are not listed on any municipal blueprint. They do not serve the flow of commuters. They serve the flow of energy. Ask yourself why every major cathedral in Europe and every state capital in America is built upon a subterranean network of water-carrying vaults. Water is a conductor. The old measurements, the specific cubic volume of these vaults, reveal a mastery of hydroacoustics that we are told was impossible before the 20th century, but the evidence is there, calcified in the limestone. They were using the Earth's own circulatory system to power their cities, not steam, not coal, not the dirty, combustible fuels of our era. They were using the resonance of the tides. The Tartarian world was a wireless world, a world of atmospheric electricity. This is why the old buildings are capped with copper domes and topped with finials that look suspiciously like antennas. They weren't decorative, they were functional. We have been taught to look at a lighthouse and see a lamp when we should be seeing a transmitter. We have been taught to look at a steeple and see a cross when we should be seeing a cathode. The erasure is so thorough that we look directly at the technology and call it art. This leads us to the mystery of the Great Mud Flood. Throughout the 19th century, photographs show a world partially buried. In Russia, in England, in the Americas, buildings of immense complexity sit half sunken into the earth. The official explanation is pavement raising or drainage issues. But ask yourself, why would an entire civilization build grand, ornate windows at knee level? Why would they bury the most intricate stonework of their facades beneath 6 feet of dirt? They wouldn't. The dirt arrived later. It arrived suddenly. There is a global pattern of sedimentary accumulation that defies the logic of slow geological time. It is a layer of history that has been manually scrubbed from the record. In the archives of the mid-1800s, there are references to the Great Settling, a time when the sky turned the colour of bruised plums and the ground became fluid. This was the moment the old measurements were lost. The energy grid was short-circuited by a literal deluge of earth. Those who survived were the orphans of the old world, the ones who were small enough to adapt, or perhaps the ones who were chosen to forget. The institutional gatekeepers call this the rise of the middle class, a polite euphemism for the scavenging of a dead empire. We didn't build the Victorian era, we excavated it. We found the buildings, shoveled out the mud from the first floors, and renamed the architecture after the monarchs of the day. Look at the maps of the 16th and 17th centuries. Mercator, Ortelius, Ondius. They all show a massive landmass in the north, Hyperborea, and a sprawling unified empire labelled Tartaria, or Grand Tartaria. This was not a placeholder for unknown lands. The detail is too specific. The cartography includes cities, rivers, and mountain ranges that have since been erased or renamed. By the 19th century, this landmass is gone, replaced by the Russian Empire or the American territories. This is the ultimate cartographic gaslighting. They didn't just hide the people, they hid the land. They changed the projection of the globe to make the old world look smaller, more fragmented, less significant. They introduced the concept of the nation state to break the global unity of the old resonance. This is why our modern borders make no sense geographically. They are scars on the map intended to disrupt the flow of the old energy lines, not a natural progression, not a discovery, a conquest of memory. The skeptics will point to exploration and pioneer spirit. But what is a pioneer if not a scavenger with a flag? What is an explorer if not a looter with a map? We are told the Great West was an empty wilderness, yet every railroad line follows an ancient path, and every newly discovered valley contains the ruins of a stone bridge or a vanished canal. The technical terms of the old builders, the plumb line, the level, the square, have been co-opted by secret societies who claim to be the keepers of the light. But ask yourself, if they are the keepers, why is the world so dark? Why has the quality of our craftsmanship declined so sharply? A stonemason from 1750 could carve a block to within 1/1000th of an inch using primitive tools. Today, with laser-guided cutters, we cannot achieve the same structural integrity. This is because we have lost the master key of measurement. We are using the wrong math. We are using flat math for a curved universe. The old world understood that space is not empty. It is a plenum, a field of energy. Their measurements were designed to interact with that field. Ours are designed to ignore it. The institutional erasure is not just about books. It's about the very way we perceive reality. We are taught to see the world as a collection of dead objects rather than a symphony of vibrations. This is why we are so easily controlled. We have been unplugged from the source. We are like ghosts wandering through a cathedral, wondering why the organ doesn't play anymore. In the deepest vaults of the Vatican and the Smithsonian, there are artifacts that would break the modern mind. I have spoken to men who have seen the anatomical discrepancies, skulls with a cranial capacity 40% larger than our own. These were not deformations. These were the Tartarians. They were the ones for whom the 30-foot doors were built. They were the ones who could hear the frequency of the stars. We are their down-sampled descendants. We are the low-resolution version of humanity. Ask yourself, why is there a global push for transhumanism today? Why are they trying to merge us with machines? Because the original biological machine, the human body, is broken. We have been disconnected from the Earth's resonance for so long that our DNA is fraying. They are trying to patch the system because they know the old world is waking up. The mud is shifting. The buried floors are breathing. The ghost levels are starting to hum again. This is the tense and unsettling reality of our time. We are living on the edge of a revelation that will make our entire history seem like a fever dream. Consider the load distribution of a modern city. It is precarious. It relies on a constant influx of external energy. If the power grid fails, the city dies in 3 days. Now consider the star forts. They have stood for centuries without maintenance. They are self-sustaining resonators. They were built to last for millennia. This contrast of scale is the ultimate proof of our decline. We build for the next quarter. They built for the next eon. This is the skeptical of authority stance we must take. The authorities tell us we are progressing, yet every metric of human health and happiness is in decline. We are told we are more connected, yet we are more isolated than ever. This is because our connections are digital illusions, while the old world's connections were physical, vibrational, and real. Not this digital static. Not this plastic world. Something else, something ancient, something we are beginning to remember. I once found a set of blueprints in an abandoned municipal building in Detroit. They were dated 1892. They showed a series of atmospheric energy towers that were to be built across the city. The blueprints were stamped cancelled by order of the Department of Commerce. The reason given: not feasible for taxation. This is the smoking gun of institutional gatekeeping. The old world's energy was free. It was pulled from the air. You cannot tax the air. You cannot put a meter on the resonance of the earth. So they destroyed the towers. They burned the blueprints. They replaced the Tartarian grid with a system of wires and meters, a system of debt and control. They turned the world into a marketplace, and they turned us into the product. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if energy was as free as oxygen? You would be uncontrollable. You would be free. And that is the one thing the gatekeepers cannot allow. The narrative of global erasure is a pattern-based investigation that leads to a single terrifying conclusion. We are being farmed, not for our labour, but for our frequency. By keeping us in buildings that are out of measure, by feeding us out of measure food, and by forcing us into out of measure time, they keep our energy at a low harvestable level. This is the sombre and intellectually provocative truth at the heart of the Tartarian mystery. It's not about buildings, it's about the soul. It's about the hijacking of the human experience. We are being kept in a state of amnesia so that we don't realize we are the rightful heirs to a world of infinite energy and beauty. We are the kings and queens of a realm we think is a wasteland. The pattern of investigation is now global. From the pyramids of Giza to the ruins of New York City, the same measurements are reappearing. People are beginning to walk through the streets with calipers and frequency counters. They are looking past the Beaux-Arts facades and seeing the megalithic bones beneath. The revisionist documentary of our lives is being rewritten in real time. We are no longer accepting the official narrative. We are asking, what if? And we are not stopping until we find the answer. The tension is rising. The forbidden knowledge is leaking out of the cracks in the pavement. The gatekeepers are scrambling to patch the holes, but the dam is breaking. The old world is coming back, and it is bringing its measurements with it. We end this part of the journey with an unresolved philosophical open loop. If we find the master key, if we rediscover the Tartarian measurements, what will we do with them? Are we ready to live in a world of resonance? Or have we become so accustomed to our cages that the open sky would terrify us? We are standing on the threshold of a forgotten doorway. The knob is iron, it is massive, and it requires both hands to turn. But once it opens, there is no going back. Ask yourself, are you an inhabitant of the attic, or are you the owner of the house? The choice is yours, but the clock is ticking. And the clock, like everything else we have been given, is a lie. The true time is not measured in seconds, but in the pulse of the earth. A pulse that is getting louder every day. A pulse that says, remember. Remember the scale. Remember the light. Remember who you are. The rhythmic ticking of the modern clock is a metronome for a funeral march. It is a pacing mechanism designed to keep us from noticing the stillness of the stone giants surrounding us. If you look at the great exhibitions of the 19th century, the White City of Chicago, the Crystal Palace of London, the Exposition Universelle in Paris, you see a world that appeared fully formed, as if exhaled by a god, only to be systematically demolished months later. We are told these were temporary structures made of plaster and hemp. Ask yourself, Why would a supposedly struggling civilization spend billions in modern currency to build hundreds of massive, ornate, electrically lit palaces just to tear them down with dynamite and sledgehammers before the year was out? What if they weren't building them at all? What if they were cleaning them? The fairs were a liquidation sale of the old world's assets. They were a controlled environment where the new populace could be introduced to the inherited technology in a way that framed it as a novelty or a future invention rather than a legacy of the past. It was a psychological operation of the highest order. They showed us the wonders of the Tartarian grid, labelled it a demonstration, and then pulled the plug. Not a construction project, not a celebration, a sanitization. Consider the load distribution of the global narrative. It rests on the assumption that we are the most advanced humans to ever walk the earth, yet our ancestors moved stones that our modern cranes cannot lift. They built structures that survived millennia, while our apartment complexes crumble in 50 years. This is not progress, it is a regression disguised by the frantic speed of digital data. The institutional gatekeeping of the architectural world relies on the term over-engineered. When we find a bridge from the 1700s that can support 20 times the weight of the traffic it was supposedly built for, the historians call it over-engineered. They use this word to dismiss the possibility that the bridge was intended for a different kind of traffic entirely. Something heavier, something larger, something that moved with a gravitational authority we can no longer comprehend. If you measure the thickness of the glass in the few remaining original windows of the grand cathedrals, you find it is not glass at all. It is a crystalline composite that resonates at specific frequencies. It was not meant to keep the wind out, it was meant to keep the energy in. We are living in a world of dampeners where every surface has been covered in insulation to prevent us from feeling the hum of the earth. The erasure trope is most visible in the way we treat the dead. Ask yourself, why did the late 1800s see a global obsession with massive megalithic cemeteries? We are told it was a Victorian romanticisation of death, but look at the mausoleums. They are miniature versions of the star forts. They are built with the same precision, the same resonant geometry, and often the same mysterious copper finials. They are not tombs, they are safe rooms for the biological data of the old world. While the cities were being reset and the mud was being cleared, the genetic records were stored in stone. This is why you feel a strange sense of ancient presence in a 19th century graveyard that you never feel in a modern memorial park. One is a library of the old resonance, the other is a disposal site for the new, diminished humans. The skeptical of authority investigator must ask, if they lied about how we lived, why wouldn't they lie about how we died? The history of the 19th century is a black hole. It is a century of missing people, missing buildings, and missing technology, all replaced by a frantic, staccato narrative of industrial breakthroughs that seem to happen simultaneously across the globe without any communication. What if the Tartarian human was not just taller, but possessed a different skeletal density? If the atmosphere of the past was more compressed, more oxygenated, or electrically charged, the human frame would have reached its natural potential. We see this in the oversized armor in the basements of European museums. Armor that is labelled as ceremonial because the curators refuse to admit it was built for a wearer 7 feet tall. Not a costume, not a decoration, a functional skin for a superior being. The institutional erasure of these artifacts is a global effort. When a giant skeleton is found in a mound in Ohio or a cave in the Caucasus, the Smithsonian or its local equivalent arrives within 48 hours. The site is sealed. The evidence is lost in transit. The discovery is labelled a hoax in the morning papers. This is the pattern-based investigation that reveals the truth. The gatekeepers are not protecting us from a lie. They are protecting themselves from our memory. They are terrified that we will look at our own hands and realise they are too small for the tools our fathers left behind. The staccato rhythm of our modern lives is a defence mechanism against the sombre realisation of our own obsolescence. We work, we consume, we sleep, all within a narrow band of frequency that keeps us from noticing the pattern of erasure. But every so often, the veil thins. You stand in the middle of a city like Cincinnati or Budapest, and for a split second, the modern noise fades away. You see the red thread connecting the stone cornices. You see the urban exploration potential of the empty spaces between the walls. You realise that the city is not a place where people live, but a machine that people inhabit, and the machine is broken. The technical terms of our enslavement are zoning, permitting, and code compliance. These are the modern sigils used to ensure that no one accidentally builds a structure that resonates with the earth. No one is allowed to build with the old measurements. You must use the standardized units. You must use the approved materials. You must remain within the safe frequencies. This is the institutional gatekeeping of our very physical reality. Ask yourself, why are we so afraid of forbidden knowledge? Is it because it is dangerous or because it is liberating? If you knew that you were designed to live for 500 years in a body that could move stones with sound, would you still go to your office job on Monday? The intellectually provocative truth is that our entire society is built on a foundation of strategic weakness. We are kept weak so that the inheritors can maintain control over the ruins. They live in the ghost levels. They use the old energy. They look down at us from the soaring heights of the buildings they claim to have preserved for our benefit. The tensy and unsettling reality is that the reset didn't end in 1910. It is ongoing. Every time a historic building is demolished for a glass parking garage, a piece of the old grid is severed. Every time a language is lost, a frequency is muted. Every time a human measurement is replaced by a digital one, we move one step further from the truth. The revisionist documentary of our era must focus on the contrast of scale between the hand-carved past and the laser-printed present. We are told that we are evolving toward a technological singularity, but what if the singularity already happened? What if the Great Reset was the result of a technology that became too powerful to control, leading to a global short circuit that we call the mud flood? The unresolved philosophical open loop is this: are we the survivors of a catastrophe or the products of a laboratory? Were we scaled down to survive a harsher world, or were we scaled down to be easier to manage? The investigation continues, not in the libraries, but in the streets. It continues in the sub-basements and the attics. It continues in the first-person experience of every human who walks through a massive stone archway and feels a sudden, inexplicable sense of home. The global pattern is undeniable. The institutional erasure is failing. The urban exploration of our own history has begun. We are finding the anomalies in the brickwork. We are hearing the hum in the tunnels. We are looking at the world's fairs and seeing the culling of the old world. The staccato sentences of the gatekeepers are being drowned out by the rhythmic pulse of the earth. Not their story, not their time. Something else, something ours, something coming back. The investigation is not just about the past, it is about the immediate future. What happens when the new humans realize they are living in a giant's house? What happens when we stop trying to fit into the small measurements and start reaching for the grand scale? Ask yourself, what if the ground beneath my feet is not earth, but the roof of a buried world? Ask yourself, why do I feel so heavy in a world that claims to be so light? The tense silence of the ghost levels is waiting for an answer. The somber history of the orphan trains is waiting for a witness. The intellectually provocative reality of Tartaria is not a theory, it is a memory trying to surface. We are the ones who must pull it up. We are the ones who must measure the truth for ourselves, not with their rulers, not with their clocks, with our own blood, our own bone, and our own resonance. The open loop is calling. The investigation is live. The rhythmic pounding of the pneumatic drill in the street outside is a frantic heartbeat, a desperate attempt to drown out the low-frequency vibration of the stones. When you examine the foundational displacement of the older districts in any colonial capital, you notice the masonry does not begin at the level of the sidewalk. It continues down past the sewers, down past the fibre optic cables, down into a stratum of history that has been officially reclassified as bedrock. Ask yourself why the city planners of the 1870s were obsessed with grading. They tell us it was for drainage, for the health of the urban sprawl. But if you look at the cross-sections of the excavated hills in San Francisco or the leveled mounds of St. Louis, you see the cross-sections of buildings. You see the sheared off edges of brickwork that look like the rings of a tree. They weren't grading the land. They were grinding down the peaks of a drowned civilization. The institutional gatekeeping of the geological record is the ultimate shield. If they can convince you the ground has always been where it is, they can convince you that the windows at your feet were always meant to be coal chutes, not a design choice, not a necessity, a concealment. Consider the load distribution of the heavy industry that supposedly built the modern world. We are shown lithographs of soot-stained men with wooden pulleys moving 40-ton boilers into place. It is a fairy tale for the industrial age. To move such weight, to seat it with the precision required for high-pressure steam, requires a floor that does not flex. It requires a resonance-free environment. When you go into the old power stations, the ones they are currently turning into luxury lofts and innovation hubs, look at the floors. They are often 10 feet thick, composed of a magnetic concrete that has no modern equivalent. The technical terms of our current engineering cannot account for how these foundations were poured without a single crack or seam. This is the Tartarian legacy, a world where the building was the battery. The human measurements used here were not based on the length of a foot, but on the capacity of the body to act as a bridge between the sky and the ground. The atmospheric energy was harvested by the very skin of the architecture. The copper, the gold leaf, the mercury-filled finials, these were the components of a global circuit. We have been told they are ornaments. Ask yourself, when has a corporation ever spent 40% of its budget on ornaments that serve no purpose? Never. They were components. The erasure trope is a masterclass in psychological conditioning. They take the evidence and they put it in a museum, but they change the label. They take the power stations and they call them cathedrals. They take the sound resonators and they call them pipe organs. They take the energy antennas and they call them spired monuments. By changing the vocabulary, they change the perception. If you walk into a cathedral expecting to pray, you will not notice that the geometry of the nave is designed to amplify a specific frequency of sound that induces a trance state. You will not notice that the stained glass is a filtered lens for a specific spectrum of light. You will not notice that the pulpit is positioned at the exact focal point of an acoustic lens. This is institutional erasure via rebranding. They gave us a religion to explain away the technology they didn't want us to use. They gave us faith so we wouldn't ask for function, not a spiritual awakening, not a cultural shift, a strategic occupation of the mind. What if the orphan trains were not carrying the children of the poor, but the new model of humanity? If the Great Reset involved a biological downscaling, then the children were the first generation of the small people. They were placed in the large world to see if they could inhabit it without questioning the scale. They were raised in asylums, another word for the repurposed palaces of the old world, where their memories were systematically replaced with a standardized national history. Ask yourself why the late 19th century saw such a massive explosion in the public school system. It was a mass reprogramming effort. The children were taught that the massive buildings around them were built by their great-grandfathers, who were pioneers. They were taught to measure in the new units. They were taught to forget the thala and the sacred cubit. They were taught to be cogs. The somber reality of the classroom is that it is a containment zone for the curiosity of a diminished species. We are the descendants of those orphans. We are the ones who stopped asking why the doorknobs were at our shoulder height. Look at the contrast of scale in the global military infrastructure. Every major port city in the world is guarded by a star fort. From the dry Tortugas to the coast of Japan, the geometry is identical. The institutional gatekeepers say this is the Vauban style of fortification, designed to deflect cannon fire. But look at the patterns from above. They are not shields, they are fractal antennas. They are positioned at the mouths of rivers, where the fresh water meets the salt, a natural battery. The measurements used in these forts are tied to the wavelengths of the Earth's magnetic field. They were the power plants of the Tartarian Empire, regulating the energy of the waterways. When the reset happened, the new authorities moved in, added a few cannon embrasures to make them look like forts, and claimed they were for defence. Ask yourself, defence against whom? The only enemy was the truth. The only siege was the one being laid against our collective memory. Not a war of nations, not a conflict of kings, a coup of the planetary grid. The pattern-based investigation reveals that the erasure is getting harder to maintain. As our modern infrastructure fails, as the planned obsolescence of our digital world kicks in, the old bones are showing through. When a hurricane hits a modern city, the state-of-the-art buildings are the first to fall. The Tartarian foundations remain. They are unmoved, they are waiting. The skeptical of authority investigator realizes that the climate change narrative is often used as a cover for the sedimentary. displacement that is still occurring. They are reclaiming the coastlines not to save the environment, but to rebury the ruins that the rising tides are exposing. They are building seawalls over harbour cities that shouldn't exist according to the official timeline. This is the tense and unsettling game of hide and seek being played by the global elite. They are racing against the earth itself. The earth is trying to remember. The earth is trying to push the mud back and reveal the mirror. In the urban exploration of our own DNA, we find the same ghost levels. Biologists speak of junk DNA, the 97% of our genetic code that seemingly does nothing. Ask yourself, what if that isn't junk? What if it's the deactivated code of the larger human? What if it's the software for a brain that can perceive the Tartarian frequencies? The institutional erasure extends into our very cells. We are told we are efficient biological machines, but we are actually throttled versions of a much grander design. We are running on a legacy system that has been locked from the outside. The technical terms for our current state are limited bandwidth and sensory deprivation. We are living in a world of vibrant colour, but we are only allowed to see in grayscale. Not a natural limit, not an evolutionary stage, a biological prison. The rhythmic cadence of this investigation leads us to the red thread of the global fairs. At the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, there was an Igorot village, a display of primitive people from the Philippines. The narrative was clear. Look how far we have come. But look at the background of the photographs. Behind the grass huts are massive domed palaces of white stone dripping with electric lights and atmospheric power. The primitive people were the distraction. They were the visual buffer used to make the inhabitants feel superior to their own history. The contrast of scale was used as a weapon. If you are told you are civilized because you have a light bulb, you won't ask who built the power station that feeds it. You won't ask why the power station looks like it has been there for 1,000 years. You will just pay your bill and keep your head down. This is the intellectually provocative heart of the mystery. The Tartaria phenomenon is not a conspiracy theory in the traditional sense. It is a post-traumatic recovery of the human species. We are waking up from a concussion. We are looking at the bumps on our heads and the ruins in our yards, and we are putting the pieces together. The staccato sentences of the news cycle are designed to keep us in a state of perpetual present, but the rhythmic pulse of the old world is calling us back to a deep time, a time when human measurement was a sacred act of alignment, not a mundane act of commerce, when a man's span was a measure of his reach into the infinite, when a foot was a step upon a living, breathing, energetic earth, not this plastic yardstick, not this digital zero, something else, something ancient, something we are. We end this segment on a somber and tense note of warning. The gatekeepers know we are looking. They are monitoring the urban exploration forums. They are fact-checking the architectural anomalies. They are trying to debunk the measurements. But you cannot debunk a feeling. You cannot debunk the inquisitive shiver that goes down your spine when you stand in the center of a star fort and feel the ground hum. You cannot debunk the skepticism that arises when you see a pioneer log cabin sitting next to a neoclassical skyscraper. that was supposedly built at the same time. The pattern is too large to hide now. The erasure is cracking. The open loop is widening. Ask yourself, if I am not who they told me I am, then what am I capable of? The answer is written in the load distribution of your own soul. You were built for a larger world. It is time to start measuring up. The investigation continues into the mirror cities. For every city we see on the surface, there is a reflection below. A city of tunnels, vaults, and energy resonators that are still active. When the mud came, it didn't just bury the buildings, it insulated them. It preserved the old tech in a state of suspended animation. The institutional gatekeepers have been trying to reactivate these sites for decades. They call it modernization. They call it urban renewal. But it is actually a salvage operation. They are trying to plug in to the Tartarian grid without letting us know it exists. They are using the subterranean levels to run their black projects, while we sit in the attic and argue over the cost of living. Ask yourself, what is the true cost of living in a world where the power is free, but the people are not? The tense silence of the ghost levels is the only receipt we have. The investigation remains open. The pattern remains clear. The erasure remains the enemy. The heavy metallic scent of ozone hangs in the air of the great libraries of the world. It is a scent that shouldn't be there, drifting through the stacks of authorized history. If you look at the paper quality of the records from the 1840s, you find a sudden jarring transition. The old world paper is thick, fibrous, and resilient, built to survive for centuries. The new world paper is acidic, brittle, and designed to crumble. The institutional gatekeeping of our memory is literally built into the medium of our records. They don't have to burn the books if the books burn themselves from the inside out. Ask yourself why their national archives of every major power are kept in climate-controlled vaults, while the living history of our streets is left to rot in the rain. It is a pattern of erasure that targets the physical durability of the truth. They want a history that is as disposable as our modern appliances, not a legacy, not a foundation, a temporary narrative. Consider the load distribution of the global public health crisis of the 19th century. We are told of cholera, yellow fever, and smallpox ravaging the cities, but look at the solutions provided. The sanitation movement involved the wholesale destruction of the old neighborhoods. They tore down the massive stone tenements and replaced them with sanitary brick rows. They claimed the old stones held the miasma. This is a technical term for a frequency they couldn't control. The old stones were resonant. They held the atmospheric charge of the earth. By removing them, they desensitized the population. They replaced vibrational health with chemical intervention. The institutional erasure of the old healing arts, the use of sound, light, and geometry to maintain the body, was rebranded as quackery. Ask yourself why the modern hospital is a place of white light, sharp angles, and buzzing machinery. It is designed to be out of measure with the human heart. It is a resonance killer. The erasure trope is most evident in the renaming of the stars. The Tartarian astronomers didn't just see dots of light, they saw nodes in a celestial network. Their measurements of the vault of heaven were tied to the measurements of their vaulted ceilings. The microcosm reflected the macrocosm. When the reset occurred, the maps of the sky were redrawn. The constellations were given new mythological backstories to obscure their navigational and energetic functions. We were told the stars were gas giants millions of light years away, rather than proximity terminals for the Earth's energy. This contrast of scale was intended to make us feel small, isolated, and insignificant. If you are a tiny speck in a cold, dead universe, you are much easier to govern than if you are a resonator in a living, breathing cosmos. Not a discovery, not a scientific advancement, a cosmic isolation protocol. What if the great pyramids and the great cathedrals are the same machine, just built in different tuning keys? If you measure the King's Chamber and the apse of Notre Dame, you find the same rhythmic proportions. They are both designed to interact with the hydrogen line of the universe. The institutional gatekeepers say they are tombs and churches because they cannot admit they are broadcasters. The Tartarian world was a world of sympathetic resonance. If you struck a note in one city, it was felt in the next. This is the global pattern that the New World Order had to break. They introduced standardized time to ensure that the pulse of the world was fragmented. They made sure that noon in London was not noon in New York, effectively phase shifting the global consciousness. We are living in a world of, I'd call, temporal static, unable to synchronize our collective frequency. Look at the contrast of scale in the grand staircases of the 19th century mansions. They are often 12 feet wide, with steps so shallow they feel like a ramp. We are told this was for hoop skirts and ceremonial processions. Ask yourself, would a society obsessed with efficiency and industrial output waste that much interior space for a fashion trend? No. The staircases were built for the original occupants, the ones with the anatomical discrepancies, the ones who didn't walk so much as they glided through the resonant fields of their homes. The skeptical of authority investigator sees the hoop skirt for what it really was, a visual mask used by the remaining old world elites to hide their height and their stride from the new model humans. Not a fashion, not a style, a biological disguise. Our investigation reveals a mechanical erasure of free energy. History rebranded Tartarian etheric science as failed prototypes to tether us to taxable petroleum grids. We are trained to see discarded trash where there was once high-frequency magic. By replacing sacred measurements with standardized units, institutional gatekeepers dismantled the logic of our sovereignty. Ask yourself, why pay for transit our ancestors accessed for free? As modern infrastructure thins, the old resonance leaks through the digital static. We are living in the attic of a buried world. To reclaim our future, we must remeasure the stone and remember the bone.